Welcome everybody back into NerdSesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we are joined by a special guest, friend of the show, Joel Moran of the Pick a Side podcast. We've had him on before to do some trivia. We've been on his show. So very excited to have you here today, Joel. How we doing?
I'm feeling great. I'm excited to be on NerdSesh. I was on for trivia, but now we're talking about NBA Finals prediction. And man, I'm ready to get spicy up here, folks.
Oh, yeah.
We got a Jayson Tatum topic. I'm looking forward to it. It's nice to see you guys.
Yeah, good to see you too, man. We teased a little bit yesterday that we were going to be having a Tatum topic with perhaps not the biggest Tatum fan in the world joining Logan in that department. So that'll be fun. But let's start not specifically talking about the finals, although that is mostly what we're going to cover today, but with more of a big picture topic that has sort of been going around the league as of late, which is Luka Doncic, with the level that he's been playing at, has become the front runner in a lot of people's eyes in that best player in the world conversation. So, Joel, I want to start with you. Who do you view as the best player in the NBA right now?
It got to be Luka Doncic. With all due respect to Nikola Jokic, because I think it's between him and Luka. Some people have Giannis in that conversation. I don't have Giannis in that conversation. Nikola Jokic in the second round of the playoffs, I think, got exposed once again for his lack of rim protection, his defensive weaknesses, and it opened up a brand new kind of a brand new book of problems. And Anthony Edwards was so great against them, mainly because of his weakness on defense. We saw in the Dallas series, because Dallas had Gafford and Derek Lively, he wasn't able to be as effective. As great as Nikola Jokic is offensively, I think Luka Doncic is just as good offensively. And I think because he controls the ball and he is the primary ball handler in pick and roll situations, I would rather Luka Doncic. I think he's an unstoppable offensive force, a true elite 3-level scorer who can get to the paint, who can hit the mid-range shots, who, once he gets hot from three, I mean, he's scorching. We've seen what he did against Minnesota in the closeout Game 5. I think Luka Doncic is just unstoppable, man. And the main thing about him also is the improvement on the defensive side of the floor. The Mavericks are where they are right now because their defense has been elite in the playoffs, and Luka Doncic has been a part of it. And even though as an individual defender, he may struggle to stay in front of people, it just matters what you're able to do in a team defense environment. And in a team defense environment, I think the ceiling of what the Mavericks defense has been higher than any version that we've seen of Denver. And then when comparing their offensive skill sets, I think Luka Doncic might just have a little bit of an edge over Nikola Jokic. So I think Luka, he's the best player in the world. He's taken two teams that have been constructed entirely differently to the conference finals, and one of them to the NBA finals this season.
I agree with some of what you said. I think that I would hear a case for Luka. I would hear a case for Jokic. I would hear a case for Giannis. And I think the level that Luka was at against the Timberwolves, you can definitely make the case. He was shooting 53% on step-back J's and step-back threes. He shot 43% overall from deep. Like, the level that Luka was at in that series was insane, but I think I'm still going to take Jokic. To the defensive point, I do think that Jokic was a step down defensively from where he was during his title run, but I still think he's a more impactful overall defender than Luka. Like, I think Luka can defend in space. I think he's good in isolation. He's good in those matchups. I'm not ready to say that the Dallas Mavericks defense is good because of Luka. I think he's an important cog in that machine, but I think I prefer Jokic as in terms of his rebounding with his hands. The level that he was at in this playoffs, I agree, was not where he was last year. And also, he didn't shoot the ball from behind the arc well, and if you want to hold that against him, I understand. He shot 26% from behind the arc, but I don't really know if having a couple weeks to reflect on it, I don't know if we really learn anything about the Nuggets from that series. To me, moreover than anything else, Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray couldn't buy a shot. So I'm not ready to put all of that loss solely on Jokic's shoulders. And I don't necessarily disagree, Joel. Like I said, if you want to take Luka, the level he's been at, he has a case. I think Giannis has a case. And we are Jokic fanboys, so we'll still, maybe we'll both err on that side, but I'm going to take Jokic because he's stronger. He's taller. I think he sees more passing angles. I think they're on the same level as playmakers. But to me, like Jokic's ability to just go on the low block and go to work against guys and get any look he wants is just a little more valuable. And it's tough, right? Because Jokic isn't in the field. And so consensus is going to be the guy that's still playing basketball as the better player. But I think Luka has a case. I'm not ready to fully just dethrone Jokic because of a series where his two best supporting players, couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. I'm not ready to put all of that. Does he have things that, he didn't perform to the task? Yeah, he didn't shoot the ball well. He didn't play well defensively, but I still think I marginally prefer Jokic to Luka.
It's Jokic to me, and Luka is obviously amazing. He's one of the best offensive players ever, and he just had an amazing series and absolutely played better against that Minnesota defense than Jokic did. But I do think overall, the amount of momentum going towards Luka in this conversation feels reactive to me at this moment. Like, if he goes out and has a dominant series and knocks off Boston, then we have a conversation. Then that is a playoff body of work over multiple series that would be really outstanding. What's strange to me is that it feels like we're just wiping away that Luka really struggled through the better part of the first two series of these playoffs. He was 27 a night on 54% true shooting, so 3 points below league average, and his knee is hurt, which of course is a factor, but his jumper was just ice cold. And the reality is he wasn't the best player in the Clippers series. That was Kyrie Irving. And he wasn't the best player in the OKC series. That was SGA. So that's where I don't understand how one series changes the discourse so much, because if we look at the totality of this postseason, Jokic pretty clearly played better basketball overall than Luka. Luka just had the better series more recently. And I do think there is a floor with Jokic that is extraordinarily high because of the elite rebounding, because of the elite screening, and because of, as you mentioned, Logan, that ability to generate extremely high percentage shots, 65% shots almost at will out of the post and in the paint. When Luka is off as a jump shooter, things can just get a little bit rougher than they can in sort of the worst case scenario for Jokic, as we saw in the first couple rounds, because Luka is so reliant on those pull-up looks, and because he doesn't necessarily work for a great shot every time down in the same methodical way that Denver's offense does, with some of these structured actions, with Jokic making multiple quick touches, moving the ball. The efficiency can just take a real hit for Luka, and your offense can get taken out of rhythm. On the flip side, I think this was as bad as a Jokic run can go, because his jumper was off, because he wasn't at his best defensively. Although I will say, Joel, we have seen a really good team defense built around Jokic. We saw it last year. Like, this Denver team defended at a really high level in that title run, and the rim protection, of course, is never going to be a strength. But I do think he can offset that with his hands, with his positioning, with his effort, with what he does on the glass, with his IQ, and end up being a totally solid defender who doesn't really inhibit you as a team defense. But again, like, this worst case scenario run for Jokic still averaged 29, 13, and 9 on 63% true shooting, facing two of the absolute best defensive players on the planet. And as you mentioned, Logan, if Jamal and MPJ had played decent basketball, then Denver would have gotten out of that series. I also think the ceiling with Jokic is the highest because of how he dominates the game without dominating the ball. Joel, you talk about how Luka is constantly dictating these actions as your primary ball handler, and you value that. Of course, it's extremely valuable, but throughout the course of NBA history, we have seen time and again that the most transcendently valuable offensive players are those who also operate very effectively away from the ball and have this extremely multifaceted impact and allow others to thrive with the ball in their hands by the attention that they demand at all times. And that's where I think Jokic is so exceptional. The quick decision making, the off-ball impact, the extreme versatility, curling around screens, being an elite pick and roll scorer, being an elite pick and roll ball handler. Like, he just does it all, and he keeps that offense as fluid and dynamic as possible. And that, to me, again, is another way you elevate the ceiling. So my view on this hasn't changed from the regular season, and Luka is fantastic. If you came into this thinking that Luka was the best player in the world, I would disagree with you, but that would make more sense to me than flipping because of this postseason. Because I just worry now that we're going to do this thing where we're so reactive, and whoever wins the title is effectively the best player no matter what. And we aren't even at that point. Like, Luka hasn't even done that. He hasn't had that remarkable finals run. I just think that best player alive title really, really matters. And it doesn't just sort of change hands willy-nilly. Like, there's only 15 or so guys who have held that title in the history of the modern sport, right? It's like, just because Larry Bird wins the title in 1981 doesn't mean that he was the best player in the world at that point. It's not like it went, okay, 84 Bird is the best player, 85 Magic's the best player, 86 Bird is the best player, just because their teams are winning titles. Of course, the margins are small between these guys, but I do still think there are differences that we can observe over a larger sample size than just the one series, especially when so much of it is Luka was amazing as a difficult shot maker. Jokic struggled as a jump shooter. We know that both guys are really, really good in that respect.
I think you make valid points. Denver's defense this year was 8th in defensive rating, and you can argue it wasn't even what lost them the series against Minnesota, because their defensive rating in every game against Minnesota was pretty damn good. What lost them the series was their offense, especially in Game 7. Outside of Jokic and Jamal Murray, nobody else could score at all. But with that being said, anytime and at any point in NBA history, if we crown a guy the best player in the world, and in a Game 7 situation, if he's up 3-2, and you lose Game 6 by 45 points, and then Game 7, you blow a 20-point lead in the second half, and you end up losing that series, that's where the title right now is up for grabs. And I think there's only one player left in the playoffs that could take it, and that's Luka Doncic. Because even if the Celtics win a championship, I'm not ready to say Jayson Tatum's the best player in the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's get it out early.
Agreed with that. Agreed with that for sure.
Dude, took it right out my mouth. I will say, the one caveat I want to add to all this, though, there is the gap coming into these playoffs. I thought the gap was like this. I thought it was massive between Jokic in the field, the rest of everybody. If it was Luka, if it was Giannis, I think those margins have been closed a little more from where we were during the regular season. And it is an embarrassing loss, Joel. Like, I don't want to just sweep that under the rug. Like, you know, we can commend Denver for coming back after dropping both games on their home floor. But yeah, dropping the final 2 games and blowing a 20-point lead at home is pretty embarrassing. Again, that being said, though, the collective shooting in Denver, you know, I'm not ready to just put all of that on Jokic's shoulders, but I don't know, dude. I don't really mind. Like, I think it's an interesting conversation between the two, and I don't mind if you're picking between the two. The distinction I would make between Giannis and these two guys, though, is I just think the offensive floor and the ceiling that both of them provide is just more valuable than the two-way impact that you get with Giannis. But I think the gap has closed enough to where it's not an egregious case or it's not unruly to make that. I think these are the two guys ahead of the pack, but the gap's way closer, man, because I thought it was Jokic and then everybody else, and to me now it's Jokic and Luka and then everybody else.
I don't want to exculpate Jokic either, because absolutely, they should have finished off that series. Jokic did not play at the level that he did last year. But again, I do think we have this monumentally high standard, and a lot of that difference is just 3-point shooting. And you could argue last year's was an outlier in the good direction, and this year's was an outlier in the bad direction. But if the average is somewhere in the middle between those two, like, boy, that is just an all-time offensive level. And that's the thing. Jokic did not resoundingly defend his title with how that series ended. At the same time, what he did last year, I think you could legitimately argue was the greatest purely offensive postseason run we have seen in the history of this league. Going through 3 of the best defensive bigs on the planet and putting up what he did, 30, 13, and 9.5 on like 63% true shooting. I just want to see Luka replicate that level before it's like, okay, let's give the nod to the next guy. Because he had an awesome series, absolutely. But I just think we need to see a larger body of work at that sort of like truly, not just historic, because Luka's playing at a historic level. We're talking Pantheon level. That was Pantheon level basketball from Jokic. And so I do still give him that nod until decisively proven otherwise. But it is an interesting conversation. It is certainly one that we are going to be hearing for quite some time. Okay, let's talk about the finals specifically now, because there is so much interesting stuff at play here. Revenge opportunities, two very different basketball teams, especially in terms of preseason expectations. Logan, what is the most interesting storyline to you about this series?
I mean, I think you guys can see where I'm going with this. I'm not going to hone in on just Jayson Tatum, but it's more over Boston's organization as a whole. Can the Celtics get the monkey off their back? Like, that to me is the most interesting aspect of this. There's some other ones that I think are really fascinating, but the fact that this team has so consistently been at the cusp of climbing the mountain and getting there and staking their flag as the best team in basketball. They've had so many iterations of this basketball team with so much talent in and out in the door, and they have yet to get it done. 6 conference finals appearances in 8 years. 2 NBA finals now in the past 4, with Udoka, with Mazzulla, with Brad Stevens. This to me is about the entire Celtics organization. And to me, this NBA Finals series is like a pressure cooker, man. The longer this goes, the more the pressure mounts, man. It is going to get. That's what I think is so interesting to me with Dallas is it's there's obviously pressure on Dallas' shoulders too. It's the NBA Finals. It's the biggest series of the season. But Boston has so much more on their shoulders. The fact that they have, we talked about this last episode, Joel, the fact that Boston has 5 players that you could argue that are in the top 50 of all NBA players across the league. And that is a rare kind of talent that you have to go back to, the 1980s to find real concrete examples of teams with that much aggregate talent. And the league's so much smaller than. The fact that Boston has all of this talent, the fact that they have been there so many times, the fact that this is not Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown's first trip to the finals, the fact that they have been going at this for damn near a decade trying to get one, man, with so many different versions of this team. I just think that there is so much pressure and so much weight on the Boston Celtics' shoulders. The most interesting storyline to watch is literally if they just win or lose. Can they get this monkey off their back? Pressure makes diamonds, pressure busts pipes. I'm just really interested to see which way it's going to sway for Boston. And they got to get it off their back, man. There have been too many talented versions of this team for them to not get a chip, and it's just going to mount even further if it doesn't happen this year. Guess what happens? It rolls over into next year, man, and that it gets even bigger. To me, that's the most interesting aspect of this finals.
If they lose, that's worst case doomsday scenario, and you can see the smile on my face building right now because. You mentioned all the conference finals appearances. This is not your second finals trip with another head coach, by the way, because it was Ime at first, that was Mazzulla. All of this talent, Derek White is going to get paid very soon. Jayson Tatum is getting paid very soon. The financial implications of having a roster like this are going to catch up with Boston. And if they don't win, I feel like it is a direct indictment on the best player on their team, because there is no way that any of the top players in the league have this sort of talent at their disposal and they don't come away with an NBA championship. It's just unheard of. And this is make or break for Jayson Tatum. I think that's a great storyline to look into. I think the storyline that I'm most interested to see is 2. One of them is more emotional. It's Derek Lively losing his mother this season and kind of getting that championship for her. I think it's a very heartfelt, emotional story. Kyrie Irving versus Kristaps Porzingis, both of them facing their former team, because I think they are the 2 most important players in the series outside of the main guys. With Kyrie, we know he has to show up, and he hasn't played great against Boston since stepping on Lucky. He's 0-10 against them. But then Kristaps Porzingis, he is healthy. He's going to play in this series, but he hasn't played in a while. How is he going to look? The Celtics have had the worst pick and roll defense of any team all playoffs long. Is he able to hold up better in the pick and roll? Are they going to have him in drop coverage? From what I've seen Luka do to him, and from this to kind of tension you feel between those two players. I mean, it might be Luka just trying to flat out embarrass Porzingis out there. So I think very quickly Dallas is going to challenge Porzingis and really test his health early in the series. And I think these two players, make or break, are going to be the reasons why their teams win the championship.
Absolutely. I think that those are all great choices. And the Kyrie KP dynamic is so interesting for so many reasons because they are pivotal just in terms of the basketball result. But as you mentioned, there's sort of the grudge match element for both of them. Although I think ironically, the fan base for Boston probably has a lot more resentment for Kyrie than vice versa. And I feel like same with KP with Dallas, because both those guys ultimately were very disappointing just when you zoom out and think about Kyrie. It wasn't so much about the level he was at as a basketball player. It was just about the fact that he left. And KP was absolutely disappointing in Dallas. But both those guys now are playing some of, if not the best basketball of their lives. The KP dynamic is interesting. I think he is a crucial player in this series. When you mention Luka trying to hunt him defensively, Joel, I think that's where we're going to see Boston try to avoid that as much as possible. And the way that I expect them to do that is something that we saw in the regular season where they put Kristaps Porzingis on PJ Washington. And so that keeps him out of all the pick and roll actions with the big. So if you are playing him on PJ, you're making Dallas less inclined to run repeatedly those pick and roll actions with the bigs because they're just super comfortable switching everything. And if you have Jayson Tatum on the big, then you have Tatum switching onto Luka. Like, that's a really good answer for the Boston defense. And then when you do call up KP's man to set a screen, he can play those higher drop looks where he's not super worried about PJ Washington getting behind him as the roller in the same way that he would be with a Derek Lively or with a Daniel Gafford. And that's kind of the best coverage that he can play against Luka, where he's still in a drop coverage, but again, it's a higher drop, so he's not allowing him to get that downhill momentum, and ideally, that would be able to force Luka into some of those tougher jumpers, which we know he can make, but that is a better answer for the defense. So I do think that Boston has a pretty good way to not necessarily hide KP defensively, because I think he's a really good defensive player, and what he can do as a roamer will be very impactful, but keep him away from having to guard Luka in space or in pick and roll with these sort of vertical spacers that these bigs are, because we just saw Rudy Gobert, right, struggle very much in that same way. If you are any sort of conventional big, like, Luka may just pick you apart. So I think those are great choices. The most interesting thing to me, just kind of looking at this from a historic perspective, of course, Boston has the opportunity to stamp their names in the history books as well, but Luka's opportunity to achieve some historic greatness here, as we were just kind of discussing, he is already having one of the special careers that we have seen in NBA history at this age. And if he were to get the job done, he would be the youngest finals MVP since Kawhi, but really he'd be the youngest guy to be the best player on a title team since D-Wade all the way back in 2006. And if Dallas does win this series, to me, it'll be because Luka plays at an unreal level. Because as much as I like this Dallas team, like, there's just no question, right? Boston clearly has a good bit more basketball talent. It would have to be Luka transcending and outplaying Jayson Tatum by multiple times over. This would also make him, well, he's already the first player through his age 24 season. He's 25, but he was 24 more than halfway through the year, to be 5-time first-team All-NBA. And he's third in regular season points per game. He's second in playoff points per game. All this while being an elite playmaker. Like, that's a pantheon trajectory. That is the most remarkable thing about Luka, in my opinion. He was so great so fast. And so he's 25 and he's already racked up all these achievements. And he's already at this level where it's not just you're confident he can be the best guy on a title team. It's like you've kind of been waiting. You've been waiting for them to put the team around him where he could show that in the postseason. And that's just a very unique thing. If you think about the other great players who we've seen emerge since like 2010, Steph, Jokic, Giannis, Kawhi, Harden, none of those guys immediately ascended to superstardom, anything like Luka. Luka had the best offensive season we've ever seen from a 20-year-old player. All those guys took their time to develop and ultimately find their roles and find their superstar level. So it just gives them a real head start in these all-time conversations to be racking up accolades, and it gives you such a long window to contend. And if he gets the job done at 25, then the potential there for his basketball career is just so immense. The Mavs would also be a very unique champion because they'd be the fourth team this century to win the title just 1 year after missing the playoffs entirely. They joined the 2022 Warriors, 2020 Lakers, and 2008 Celtics. '08 Celtics assembled the big three. 2020 Lakers traded for AD, and the 2022 Warriors got both Steph and Clay back. So all of those teams had like seismic shifts in terms of their rosters and their star availability. Obviously, the Mavs didn't have Kyrie for all of last year, but they were 8-12 when they did have Kyrie. Like, they weren't playing very good basketball with or without him. So to have this sort of complete change based on continuity between your two stars, but also just like really good role player moves, it's a very distinct thing throughout NBA history. They'd also be the second lowest seed to ever win the title. And if you just look at how champions are built, like, they'd really only be similar to the 2020 Lakers in recent years in terms of how much their team is built on two stars and then just straight up value role players. Where you think about the 2020 Lakers and it's like, who's their third best player? It's Alex Caruso or it's KCP. That would be very similar with the Mavs because their third best player could be a rookie. It could be Derek Lively. It could be a minimum guy, Derek Jones Jr. Could be dudes who were traded at the deadline from two of the worst teams in the league with PJ and Daniel Gafford. So I think Luka has an opportunity just to cement himself among the all-time greats already, and the Mavs have an opportunity to be like one of those really interesting and in a lot of ways unexpected and unconventional champions throughout NBA history.
Yeah, the third best player for the Lakers is Rondo, right?
I don't know. Maybe
I feel like it's interchangeable. At points, Rondo looked really good. Kuzma looked really good. Like everybody looked good. Honestly, it's interchangeable. I was looking at the Mavericks basketball reference page today, looking at the playoff stats. You know that they only have 3 players averaging double figures in the playoffs?
It's incredible.
It's Luka, it's Kyrie, and it's PJ Washington. Which, Gafford and Lively, they might be close. Derek Jones Jr. might be close. But yeah, they only have 3 players averaging double figures. But they have found a way to, series by series, just play to how they need to play to win that series. Like against OKC, PJ averaged 20. Kyrie averaged 15 is not a lot for him, but Luka struggled in that series. Role players like Jones Jr., PJ Washington, they really stepped up in that series specifically. But yeah, this team would be an anomaly. It'd be the first time the 5th seeded team has won a championship in NBA history. So if they were to accomplish this would be a remarkable feat.
Yeah.
And the fact that, they make a move at the trade deadline. The only team that I can think in recent memory that made like major like team shifting moves, it's like the 2019 Raptors, right? Mm-hmm. They got who they get? They got Gasol. They got somebody else too, right?
They got Gasol.
Yeah. Gasol. I mean, it's really uncharacteristic though too that a team makes a midseason move and gets ready. Like, not only did they have to get ready in such a short period of time to play up to championship caliber level, like they were playing great basketball almost immediately. Like it completely transformed the team. It is super unique, and I think you make a great point too, both of you guys. One, the fact that if they're going to get this done, it is going to be completely on the backs of Luka and Kyrie. I kind of want to go back now, Joel. That's an insane stat. Like, I can't think of the last team where like that applies. That is a ridiculous stat.
The 2020 Lakers are pretty close, probably.
I
think their third guy was probably averaging like 11 a game.
But I mean, it is going to be Luka and Kyrie doing everything offensively, generating every great shot for this team down the floor. And it's a unique construction. But I agree with you two, Carson. I think that Luka's going to have like a real legitimate case, and I think I might buy it if he gets this done and slays this kind of dragon, because the Celtics are a different kind of beast, man.
Yeah, and that's a great point about just being able to get your team gelling so quickly when you do have so many moving parts, because it really is a rare thing. You mentioned the 2019 Raptors. The other examples I can think of, 04 Pistons trade for Sheed midway through that season. The 08 Lakers trade for Pau Gasol midway through that season, and they don't win the title, but they do make the finals. Like, it's not a very common thing. Generally, it takes time to build that continuity and that synergy. And as you say, dude, like the Mavs from the jump, it was clear this is one of the best teams in the league. It doesn't matter what their record says. This is absolutely one of the best teams in the league, and they have certainly proven it. Okay. On the flip side of this, we have the Boston Celtics, who, as we've already established, have an overwhelming amount of basketball talent. But it does feel like there is still sort of a looming skepticism with them among a lot of basketball fans and media, and I think it's fair to say that both of you two are among that group. Joel, do you think that the Celtics are overrated or underrated?
This was very tough for me to answer this because I feel as if you can frame it in either way. If you have the Celtics winning the championship, they are underrated. If you have them losing, they are overrated because this dominant of a team usually does not lose the NBA championship. But I'm kind of torn, and I kind of feel as if they are underrated because I think this team is legitimately great. I think they are legitimately an elite team, but Dallas is getting hot at the right time. And since they've made all their trade deadline acquisitions, they're 26-5. So this team, since they have this new look roster, since they've settled in on the starting lineup, this has been one of the elite teams in basketball, even if it doesn't feature a ton of top-heavy talent. I think the Celtics as a whole, this is one of the best constructed rosters that I've seen. And if they lose this championship, they will go down as a team that I believe will be underrated because they weren't able to win, if that makes sense. Because I think if they do lose, all eyes are on the finals. That's it. It's finals or bust. And if they lose, there's going to be no middle ground. It's a disappointment of a season. It's a failure. And I think when we start talking about this team from that perspective, it's like, okay, I can understand how it's an underrated team because people aren't respecting how great this team really was. The East was weak. It had a lot of injuries. But even if the teams in the East were healthy, I still think Boston would have made it out the East. So from that lens, if they lose, people will start to spin the narrative about how they're frauds, and I think that would mean they're underrated. But just for the sake of me picking Dallas, I think there is a sense of, for me, thinking they are a bit overrated because I don't trust them the most in clutch time, and I feel like there are ways to get them out of sync. There are, and all of the games I've seen them play in these playoffs, specifically against Indiana, 3 of the 4 being close clutch games, I look at that and I say, wow, in 2 of those, Nembhard was the lead guy. Halliburton didn't play. How will the Celtics look if they're going up against Luka and Dallas in the clutch? How much different is that dynamic? So in order for me to pick the Celtics to lose, a part of me has to feel like they are a bit overrated and they're just not going to live up to the moment when they face a team as physical and hot as Dallas is right now.
I'll make the case if you don't want to, Joel. I think the Celtics collectively are underrated, but I think Jayson Tatum is overrated.
Here we go.
And I mean, we talk about all the aggregate talent that they have. This is one of the most talented teams of all time. So if they don't win the championship, it's like you said earlier, Joel. I think it's a direct indictment on Jayson Tatum and on him. The reason that we get, I saw, I didn't watch the clip, but I saw that JJ Redick was talking today about why Jayson Tatum gets so much hate across NBA circles. Why does he get that hate? It's because Boston Celtics fans incessantly tell us that he belongs in conversations that he simply doesn't belong. The Celtics are great because they're a great team top to bottom, and Jayson Tatum is a part of that great collective. But excuse me if I don't want to put him into this Jokic or Luka tier, and that's something that I don't want to do if the Celtics win the championship and everybody collectively reacts and go, oh, Jayson Tatum's the best player in basketball because he's finals MVP and his team won. It's just not how it works, and that's why I think that the Celtics collectively are probably underrated, but I think that Tatum directly is overrated because his team is great. He gets thrust into these conversations where he simply doesn't belong, and I think Tatum's great for what he does. I think he's one of the best perimeter defenders on planet Earth. I think he's a great rebounder. And on nights when Tatum plays consciously, he's a really good offensive player. But he just has way too many offensive lulls for me, to really put him into a different conversation. That's where I come down. I think the Celtics may be collectively underrated, but when we start talking about Tatum being in different conversations, that's where I would draw the line. So, yeah, I think that their team is probably underrated, but I think Tatum, because of how great the team is, gets overrated.
I think the Celtics are underrated. Now, I don't disagree necessarily that Jayson Tatum is overrated. That is an opinion I have held in the past, but I do wonder if it's just like the pendulum has swung too far on all this Celtics stuff. And it's been such a given for so long that they're a great basketball team that quite literally all that happens is criticism. And people are constantly scrutinizing every little thing that is wrong with the Boston Celtics. Everything that could theoretically go wrong. Not even that necessarily cost them, but that maybe could cost them down the line.
Why would we pat them on the back for barely beating the Pacers and scraping out wins against Andrew Nembhard, though?
That's not what I'm talking about, because I haven't been here patting them on the back. I haven't been singing their praises in these playoffs. They've also been down, in my opinion, their second best player, which we never talk about, which is fine. The Celtics are held to a really high standard, but as I said in our finals preview yesterday, Logan, it feels like they get all of the flack of being a team that is held to a really high standard, just the assumption, right? This is a great basketball team. We expect more out of them. But then they never actually get the due respect. They never actually get the credit of being a great basketball team like that. So I feel like we've reached a point where no matter what, whoever came out of the West, a lot of people were going to pick them to beat the Celtics, and I don't really agree with that line of thinking. I prefer Denver over Boston. A lot of that was matchup specific. I think that Denver would have been an exceedingly difficult matchup for Boston. I think that we saw that, the fact that they just have no answer whatsoever for Nikola Jokic, and that's where I trusted Denver's offensive formula a bit more specifically there, but Boston is a fantastic basketball team. They were 5th all-time in point differential this year and 3rd all-time in net rating. As you mentioned, Logan, they have 5 top 50-ish dudes on one team, which we haven't seen since the 80s. We were talking the other show, 87 Lakers, 83 Sixers. That's how far back you have to go to really soundly argue that point. And I just think viewing this as the same old Celtics is missing a significant part of the picture, because Drew, improved Derek White, and especially KP completely changed the dynamics for this team, in my opinion. Now you have a significantly more reliable secondary creator and shot maker in Drew Holiday than you did in the much more volatile Marcus Smart. And Drew has the ability to play bully ball. He's just in this role a more efficient and consistent offensive player. And he's not even super consistent. He was bad to start these playoffs, but he's much better than Marcus Smart. Derek White, right, has reached this level where it's okay, he is a fringe star level player, all world defensively, unbelievable spot up shooter, 90th percentile pick and roll creator. KP bullies mismatches as well as anybody in basketball, an elite floor spacing big, an elite pure rim protector. It's just a different basketball team. It's different than when it was Marcus Smart and Robert Williams out there in a worse version of Derek White. Their clutch offense is also significantly better, and I still trust Dallas more there because I just think Luka and Kyrie are such great shot makers. There are still times with Boston where I'm the process is a little bit shaky, but Derek White's dependability as a ball handler has changed those dynamics. The ability to feed KP with a mismatch has changed the dynamics. It's not as reliant on, okay, Jayson and Jalen, you have to make great decisions and make tough shots every time down the floor. They were a plus 15 net rating team in the clutch this year. They've been really good in the clutch in these playoffs. So I just think that this is a very different team than what we've seen the last couple of years. And they haven't necessarily had the chance to prove that in these playoffs because, as you mentioned, Logan, you can't really be that impressed by beating shorthanded teams. That's just the reality. But I do think the ease of that path has taken away too much, in my opinion, from just how great this Celtics team is, because maybe Twitter polls isn't the best way to judge things, but I'm seeing people put out these polls of who are you picking to win this series. I'm seeing 55-60% Mavericks. I just think no matter how much you respect Luka, no matter how much you respect Kyrie, no matter how skeptical you are of Jayson Tatum, there's no question the Mavs are the underdog on paper. There's no question. Boston has an absurdly talented starting five, and it's not even being treated that way right now. So that's where I think if Boston does fall short, it is a massive disappointment. There's no way around that. It's a massive disappointment. But with how people are talking about it, I'm is that just the expectation? Is the expectation that they're going to melt down? Because I don't agree with that. I think they need to be held to a higher standard than that. And I do expect them to play at a higher standard than I think a lot of people are holding them to.
I mean, that's part of their reputation at this point, though, too, right? That's why that people are almost anticipating it.
Yeah, but it's basketball teams change year over year, Logan. The 2024 Mavs are not the 2023 Mavs because they added some really good basketball players. The 2024 Celtics aren't the 2023 Celtics because they added some game-changing basketball players. And they haven't really had those moments. Like, I think a lot of it is confirmation bias. It's looking for, okay, we know these things have bit the Celtics in the past. Let's hyper-focus on them. And there are certain things, right? Three-point shooting variance will always be a thing for them. But as I've talked about, it is way more of a good thing that they take the most threes in the league and make 39% of them than it is a bad thing. I do think that a lot of this is coming in with the expectation that this team is going to melt down and viewing everything through that prism. And I think there's a very, very real chance that they just don't. And then a lot of people are going to kind of look around and be like, I guess that Boston team really was pretty darn great.
So based on what you're saying, Carson, and you guys did a finals preview show yesterday, so I'm assuming you gave your prediction for the finals yesterday. I didn't get to listen to it, though. Who you're taking the Celtics in the finals?
I am. I'm taking the Celtics in 6.
And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that the Celtics, like you said, they are the favorite on paper. They should be the favorite on paper. I think I've seen a little bit of both. I've seen people take the Mavericks because they don't trust Boston, and I've seen people say Boston just outmatches Dallas, and they think Boston could win in 5 games because they're that much of a superior team than Dallas. So I've seen both. I've definitely seen more so on the side of Dallas just beating them. And I think there's a couple things that go into that. Usually when we get teams that are just better than everybody else, it's very easy to predict. When KD was on the Warriors, everybody picked the Warriors to win a championship. Right. We didn't even have to go through the regular season to pick a champion. We knew from the start it was Golden State. There was a year where I was optimistic and I said, you know what? I think 2018 Harden can do it. He almost did, but Chris Paul got hurt. Did. Yeah, but we always knew Golden State was going to win, and we're just hoping a team has a chance to just beat this team. I think with Boston, the frustration lies in that we didn't get a chance to see any team in the East challenge them because Giannis got hurt. I think as much as I love the Knicks, I think Philadelphia would have gave Boston a better challenge in the series than New York with Joel Embiid healthy, because I think Joel Embiid is that great of a player. Indiana, I don't think that was much of a challenge, but Cleveland, if Donovan Mitchell maybe stays healthy, Jared Allen plays in the series, we just really didn't see any team challenge Boston. And there is that feeling with Boston that you just can't fully trust them. I think there's 2 things at play. There's people's hatred for Boston, and there's also what we've seen from Boston in the past, and they just find ways to mess it up, whether it's in the finals, Jayson Tatum doesn't perform, or it's the very next year, they go down 0-3 to an 8th-seeded Miami Heat team who we all thought at the time they should have just sweeped. I mean, they should have been up 3-0 against that team. So I think all those things are at play there. I think Boston does have some inherent advantages, though. You mentioned how they take the most threes. They make it at the highest clip, too. And I think this series poses a different challenge for Dallas because they like to have Gafford or Lively in the paint on one of those non-shooters, and they were allowing pick and pop threes, whether it was to Chet Holmgren, Karl Anthony Towns, or Naz Reid. But now you're facing a Boston team that you have to guard everybody on the perimeter because everybody is making threes at an just obscene rate. It's just unheard of. I mean, Jrue Holiday shooting 67% on corner threes. On catch and shoot threes, he's at like 45%. Derek White is at that same number too. So you're just getting just nuclear shooting to the point that the shooter that statistically is playing the worst is Jayson Tatum. And you're not going to sag off of Jayson Tatum. We saw the Warriors try to employ a game plan where they try to sag off on Jaylen Brown to have rim protection, and then he torched them. So I'm really interested to see how Dallas handles that matchup, because I think that right there is going to decide the series.
I think you're exactly right. I think it's the biggest key. Like, if KP is out there and spraying threes, I mean, that takes out Lively from the paint. It takes out Gafford. It opens up everything back door for Jaylen Brown, for Tatum getting downhill. It changes everything. And in the one regular season matchup that we saw between these two teams with Dallas's final iteration of their roster, guess what? Boston outshot them by 36 points from behind the arc, and that was the entire difference in the basketball game. There very well could be multiple games in this series where it's Boston sticking its middle finger up to Dallas and saying, hey, guess what? We're just going to make way more threes than you and drub you. Like Luka. And that's the key, right? I think if you lock Kyrie up, Luka can eat. Luka averaged 35 points per game efficiently in both matchups versus Boston, and Kyrie didn't play up to expectation. Like, if you can X out Kyrie and spray a bunch of threes, Boston's probably going to win. Like, that's a huge component for it's the biggest component for Boston, why they've been so dominant.
I don't want to discredit Andrew Nembhard, but I want to get your guys' take on this. Do you think that Drew Holiday and Derek White just didn't try against him? Like, I'll be honest. I'm watching them guard him, and I'm just like, this is not their best defensive effort. And I doubt they're going to look like this when they're going up against Kyrie in the finals.
I think that's the hallmark of this Boston team, is that throughout these plays, you just talked about it. Like, they didn't ever have to lock in. You know what I mean? They could kind of just let their foot off the pedal and play how they wanted. I think that's exactly what it was. Like, and that's why I've been critical of Boston, but that's been the expectation of when they have to lock in, when they have to apply better ball pressure and play better defense, that they're going to. But it's all theoretical. And I don't know, that's part of why I dislike Boston so much, is that I don't get that hellacious effort every night. And a big part of it is because we don't have to. Boston's so overwhelmingly talented, they don't have to put their the pedal to the metal every game. I think it's a huge component of it.
I do think, though, while I have also been absolutely critical of Boston for that, because it's frustrating, because you do see the talent advantage that they have, and you want them to win more convincingly in some of these specific games. I just think when it comes to the finals, I do believe that they're going to flip the switch. I do expect to see a more dialed-in version. To the Nembhard point, I don't think that we necessarily saw the best effort from Boston's perimeter defenders. I also think Andrew Nembhard is an exceptional tough shot maker, and a lot of these you're looking at like these switches with Jayson Tatum, and he is just like creating a sliver of separation to get to those step backs, and a lot of it he's doing out of pick and roll where he's going at the big, and he's just got such impressive change in pace and such great touch. Like, Nembhard balled out. So it wasn't Boston's best effort defensively, but also, like, he made a lot of those intermediate shots that defenses are sort of designed to concede and that are very difficult to take away. So I do want to give him his props for that. But I agree with you totally on the point you were making, Joel, about the dynamic between Boston shooting against the Dallas defense that is so specifically built upon awesome rim protection, and that it has been willing to potentially compromise conceding open threes to aggressively protect the rim. Although, for the most part, they didn't really. And this is what we saw against OKC. They were willing to roam off of these wing shooters to load up in the paint, and OKC couldn't consistently beat them with the sort of collective passing and ultimately the shooting necessary. And then the same goes for Minnesota, and they're always going to test you and see if you're willing to make those skip passes and if you can hit a high enough percentage of your threes to justify them having to pull that big out of the paint. But if anybody is equipped to do that, particularly on the shooting front, it is Boston, and that's where I think KP is just a vital, vital player in this series. We are this close to crowning an NBA champ, and with the action heating up on the court, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
There's only so many games left, and DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered with same-game parlays, live bettings, odd boosts, and so much more. Don't miss out, or you'll have to wait until next NBA season to place your bets. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your squad, and place your first bet. It's that simple.
New to DraftKings? Listen up. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500. Just deposit at least $5 and you'll get a bonus bet back equal to your first bet if it doesn't hit. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500 if your first bet doesn't hit. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. I do want to talk a little bit more about Jayson Tatum, though, because we've already gotten into it, but this is the specific question that we had written down on today's topic sheet. Joel, we'll start with you. How many players do you think, if they replace Jayson Tatum as the number one option for this team, could have Boston in this position they're in right now?
I think it's 18, no doubt, without debating it. I think it's Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, Giannis, SGA, Steph Curry, Joel Embiid, healthy, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, healthy, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, Anthony Edwards, Paul George, Zion Williamson, that's 15, Jimmy Butler. I think Paolo Banchero could have been in this position too. And I'm going to go with Jalen Brunson. It's hard for me to list guards because they are guard heavy. They have Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and Drew Holiday. But if we're just adding like a talented guard on the team, I mean, I seen Trae Young make the Eastern Conference Finals with a less talented roster. Do I think he can make the finals with a team like this? I do. John Morant, I could see it too. Kyrie Irving, maybe I can see it too, especially with how weak the Eastern Conference is. But yeah, I think there are 15 plus players that if you just put them in to replace Jayson Tatum, they could make the NBA Finals with this team. And I think it's a testament of two things. It's one, how great the Celtics team is, how much more talented the roster is than everybody else. And number two, it's how weak the East is. Now, with all these players, if I add them in, do I think they win the NBA championship? I think with 10, I can argue that they would win the NBA championship too. But as it stands right now, no, there are so many more. There's so many more players that they could just be added to this team and make the NBA Finals. Zion was the wild card in there, but you think about it. Zion with this spacing, being able to attack downhill with his playmaking chops, it would be scary. It would be truly amazing to watch.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add, Joel. I think you hit both key factors on the head. How great Boston is, how weak the East is. I'm going to throw out two goofy ones to get your gauge on the Tatum scale here, guys. What about Rudy Gobert?
Yuck. I don't know. That'd be pretty gross, man. We're moving KP back to the 4 in the big 2024. Well, let's think about it. If they were matching up with Indiana 2 games without Hallie, maybe they could still do it.
All right, and then my other one. What about Lauri Markkanen?
Yes, I think so.
Oh wow, okay.
I think that they would just be awesome offensively, and I think that obviously Lowry can't do a lot of what Tatum does defensively, but you would at least still have a big physical forward who can hold down the glass. Although that is, I guess, the challenge is if we're taking into account the injuries for the other teams that we've seen up to this point in the playoffs, I guess we have to consider that KP hasn't really played either. So that does maybe make the bar a little bit higher, but yeah, I don't really have an issue with just about any of the names that you threw out there, Joel. Like Paolo, I do think still has a lot of refining to do offensively. At the same time, like if Jaylen Brown was your best scorer, which he would be, and by the way, which he has been their best pure scorer up to this point in the playoffs, you would still have elite size and athleticism on the wings, and you would have plenty of shot making. Like the bar just hasn't been that high up to this point. It really has been a historically weak path. Like the only comparisons that I can think of is like the 2017 Cavs running through a really, really weak East. But this is probably on another level, just when you consider that the teams that they're facing aren't just weak in the scope of conference finalists and whatnot, like that they are down key players across the board.
So who's like the worst player that we could insert into Boston and they would still? Is it like? Do you guys think Julius Randle still gets this team to the finals?
Jeremy Grant.
Oh. Oh wow. He's in the archetype. He's in the archetype they need. I don't know, dude. I honestly don't think that's outrageous. Like this was a really a silly path through the East. But Jeremy Grant might be pushing it just a tad. It was very weak.
It was historically weak. I read an article on The Ringer, and just by like raw numbers, it wasn't as weak because like they faced an average win total of like 46 or 47 wins, one of those. But they adjusted for injury for every single path since like 1980. And when you adjust for injury, this year, the Celtics had the easiest path in the last 40 years to make the NBA Finals. The only one in recent memory that was weaker was the 2007 Cavs when they beat the Wizards, who they didn't have Gilbert Arenas or Caron Butler. So that was like the equivalent of like a 23-win team. Yeah. They faced the 41-41 Nets, and then in the conference finals, they faced the 50-plus win Detroit Pistons, which that was honorable.
Right.
So like that was the worst, and the Celtics are by far number one easiest, like the easiest path ever.
And you know what? We can be critical of them, guys, and we have been, but that's what you get out of being the number one seed and the best team in basketball. They earn the right to have an easy, cakey path to the finals. And you know what? I don't think we can. It can't be mad at them. We can hold it against them, and we can laugh at the how preposterous it is. But that's what regular season success gets you, man. They bought themselves the easiest path to the finals, and they earned it.
I also do want to be clear, though, because I was kind of trying to feed you guys in your Jayson Tatum bags with this question, see how far we could take it. But there's a big difference between making the finals with this specific path and making the finals in a more normal year in a legitimate conference, like even with a healthier East. Like, it's not like the East is a joke. It's just a lot of the best players on the best teams got hurt. And also, more importantly, actually winning the title. Because when we're looking at that list, Joel, you said there's about 10 guys. I don't think that that's outrageous to say. But I do want to give Tatum props for the specific ways in which he is pivotal to this team being elite. Like being able to play that true power forward role. He connects so many things defensively. His ability to guard centers is massive. It was huge in the Indiana series, shutting down the Halley-Turner pick and roll. And I think it's going to be huge in this series because I do think that they're going to have him guarding the center so that they don't have to have KP involved in those actions. And then I think his ability to switch on to Luka or Kyrie is also going to be massive. Like, I do think that that makes him their most important defensive player, certainly in this upcoming series. And of course, he is their offensive number one. Like, that's just the one spot where you can really have gripes with Tatum. His inconsistency there, at times the tendency to settle for these pull-up jumpers where he's just hot and cold. And he has physical advantages where you would like to see him more consistently aggressive and physical and downhill. So from that perspective, it's like other dudes who could fill that similar archetype. Giannis, Kawhi, LeBron, KD at the same position, I think would bring enough defensively, not nearly as much as Tatum, but then the offense would be more consistent. And Boston is so talented that they could probably still win at a real high level, maybe win it all with some more unconventional configurations. Because you mentioned, Joel, that's the weird part here. It's like replacing Jayson Tatum in a roster that's built around Jayson Tatum doesn't always just speak to the exact caliber of the basketball player. But like if you had Booker Ant in here, you'd be a little small. But I still think you'd be pretty darn switchable. You'd have really good perimeter defense. You'd still have your true five. You'd have a crazy amount of offensive skill. And you're not conceding too much size. With AD and KP out there, a too big look. Like, I think a team like that could win the title. So this team is exceptionally talented. But Tatum really is skill set wise an excellent fit. And I had him as my number 9 player in the league when we did our player rankings a few months ago. It was late in the regular season. I think my top 5 is pretty locked right now, but I do think if Tatum has a really good finals series, like he could be right outside that. I could probably see him playing his way up to number 6. And Logan, I know you're a little bit lower on him than I am. Joel, where would you have him ranked right now, like in the scope of the whole league?
I think it would be in that 8 to 10 range.
Yeah.
I've kind of flipped back and forth between him and Anthony Edwards just because we just saw the series Edwards had. And it's weird how things work this way where I think if the Timberwolves lost against Denver, it would have done more for Edwards' reputation than him losing in the conference finals. He still played pretty well to me, but, you know, he was exposed as a playmaker and his decision-making is just a tad bit slower than what you'd like it to be. But for the most part, the offensive infrastructure around him isn't helping him either. So, like, the defense Anthony Edwards faced, the Dallas defense he faced, it's going to be different than the Dallas defense Tatum faces just because you're not able to camp a big inside the paint and have that rim protection, the same one Ant was facing. So I'm kind of flipping back and forth between those two right now. But he definitely be in the 8 to 10 range. Let me see. Jokic, Luka, Giannis, SGA, Curry. That's 5.
Yep.
I think Joel Embiid, when healthy, that's 6. I've had this thought of maybe just having the young guys take over after 6, but Kevin Durant is still a fantastic player that I don't think gets his just due because he's just not in a conducive team environment to win right now. So KD would be 7. LeBron James, of course, you have to put him. That's probably 8. So 9 and 10, yeah, it's probably Tatum, Anthony Edwards. Those are kind of my 9 and 10 right now. My gripe with Tatum, and this is really my biggest problem with Tatum. it's just the mid-range shooting. You can make an argument for all other levels of the floor. He's really efficient. And I made this argument before that, Jayson Tatum's a great player. Nobody's saying he's not a great player, but is there any one specific skill set on offense that he does at an elite level? I'm talking about top of the top. I can see the argument for finishing. He's a great finisher on a basket, but when you account efficiency and for volume, is he still an elite finisher? Is he elite at getting to the cup? Does he do it as often as the other elite finishers? I don't think he does. He's not an elite shooter, even though he can be hot. So that was my main gripe. And in these playoffs thus far, he's shooting 33% on pull-up 2-point jump shots. That is an awfully low mark for superstar players. And that is my biggest gripe in his game right now, that I think that shot should be more efficient. I don't know why it's not more efficient, but you couple that in with his clutch time numbers from this past season. He was one of the worst clutch players of volume this past year. In the playoffs, it hasn't been better. I think he's shooting like below 30% from the field in clutch time these playoffs, like 16% from three. Jaylen Brown has been much better than him in the clutch. So those are just things with Tatum. It's like in the conference finals, he averaged 31, 10, and 6. But I felt like it was like 22, 10, and 6. Like I didn't really feel that type of impact from him. And that's just me, like I understand in game one he had those 10 points in overtime, but I didn't feel like those 10 points that he had in overtime were necessarily like the greatest 10 points. I'm being very nitpicky, but it's like the dribble drive from Derek White where he creates a double team and Jayson Tatum is wide open from three. He pump fakes and gets a good look. I'll give him that. And then he makes an and one layup in the paint. He was 2 for 4 overall in overtime, and then the rest were like free throws. So I don't know. I wasn't really that impressed.
What's so weird is Tatum's like lack of consistency, and not even just terms of shot making, but shot diet. And that's what's so confusing to me, right? Is like guys have like their identities. Like Jokic is going to go on the low block and he's going to go to work and he's going to set screens and do all these other little things. And it's like, what version of Jayson Tatum am I getting in this game? Because there are games where Jayson Tatum goes and posts up and he is drawing double teams and creating playmaking opportunities for his teammates. And there's also other games where, Joel, he'll be doing all the stuff that you talked about him not doing. He'll be getting to the rim. He will be generating wide open pull-up jumpers. And then he's just clanging them. And it's like so frustrating because it's like, I love the shots you're taking. You're just not hitting them today. Tatum's a perplexing offensive player, man. And I want to give him credit. Like, I think he has grown as a playmaker. I think his post game has grown. But, like, there's just those little tendencies that are frustrating where he is settling for threes and he's settling for these pull-up jumpers. And that's what I mean is the lack of consistency and, like, the lack of a real offensive identity, I guess, as an offensive player. Like, that's my real big issue with Tatum is, like, there's just nowhere. Like, I know Jaylen Brown is going to work his way downhill, and that is my favorite aspect of Jaylen Brown. That's something that is consistent that I can bank on. Every game, JB is going to lower his head, lower his shoulder, and he's going to get to the hoop. I don't know what Tatum I'm getting game to game, and that's what's so frustrating to me about him.
He is a very interesting player, and you make the point about how he doesn't have that one A-plus trait offensively, Joel. And that's true. That's pretty just objectively true. But there's a lot that he does really, really well. And obviously, there is a lot that he does pretty exceptionally well on the defensive side of the ball. And that's just who he is. He is sort of the all-around superstar. And there is a level of offensive inconsistency and offensive frustration you get with him that you don't get with a lot of the other top 10 guys in the league. And you certainly don't get when you compare him to the top 5 guys. And that's where I think people often set Tatum up for failure is they put him into the tier. They say, wow, absolutely he's better than Luka. Look at how much more his team wins. And that's where it's like, no, there's just a completely different level of shot quality that a guy like Luka generates possession after possession than Jayson Tatum does. Same goes obviously for like a Nikola Jokic. Like, you can't put him in those conversations, especially offensively. But I do think he does a lot of stuff that really impacts winning basketball at a very high level. And in Boston, That is where I think, especially with this specific team, with all the aggregate offensive skill, he is best set up to not necessarily be held accountable for his specific offensive shortcomings because they don't need him to take over every night in a way that a lot of other teams do. If Ant doesn't go full throttle and give you 30 a night efficiently, Minnesota's not going to have enough offensive pop, I would say generally. However, this past series, like, he actually let them down big in a couple of spots where they did have enough. But broadly, like, there's a clear gap in offensive skill. Tatum gets to kind of be the connective superstar here. And before the year, I had a take, which was that I preferred Devin Booker over Jayson Tatum. And basically my rationale for that was exactly what we're talking about. Tatum is clearly a less reliable offensive player. I trust Book's shot making to just be on another level. And I would argue he's a slightly better playmaker, so he's a better, more reliable offensive player. But I think that take was wrong because I don't think that take quite accounted for the two-way difference that Tatum does have because of how superior he is on that side of the ball and how much better he is on the glass. So I think really anywhere in that sort of 6 to 10 range, I'm good with. Kawhi, I would have mentioned among the names that you were saying. Joel, what's tough with him is it's like you literally never know if he's going to be available, but he was outstanding when healthy this year. I still probably trust LeBron a bit more than Jayson Tatum, but also it's like I don't know that LeBron could just physically hold up for 20-plus games of a postseason carrying the load that you need to as a number one just because of age, and I know that Jayson Tatum can. In a one-game setting, I would take LeBron. Over a course of a postseason, I very well may take Jayson Tatum. All right, let's do one last topic on this series, and then we'll move on to a couple of big-picture things. Logan, we'll start with you. What is your boldest take for the finals?
I'm so glad we just hashed all this out, man, because I don't even need to make the take.
Nice.
Jayson Tatum gets repeatedly outplayed offensively by someone on his own team. I'm not saying every single game, but I think there's going to be a couple of games where Jaylen Brown is just clearly the best offensive player for the Celtics, and there's other games where Derek White is clearly the best offensive player for the Celtics. And again, this speaks to two things: Tatum's inconsistencies and how great the Celtics collective is. If it's Drew Holiday, if it's Kristaps Porzingis, like, I'm not going to say he's not going to be the Celtics' best player because, again, I do think there are just things that don't appear in the stat sheet, like what he does defensively, what he does on the glass. Like, he is, regardless of what he brings offensively, he is the Celtics' most important player in this series because I think he has to be the best defensive player on the court. Like, I think that is unalienable for the Celtics to win this series. Like, he's got to reach that level. But offensively, I just have not loved. I'm so glad you brought up that stat, Joel. I thought that was the most, the 33% on pull-up twos. That's the most damning number to me about Tatum. And with Dallas's ability to take away the rim, maybe that's counteracted by KP stretching the floor. Maybe it opens up Tatum to attack some clean paints and Jaylen Brown too, and maybe he's better because of that. Normally those pull-up twos are shots that you have to make in these playoff settings, in these nasty environments, and he hasn't been hitting them, and he has not been this team's best offensive player. So that's my take, man. I think Tatum gets repeatedly outplayed offensively by someone on his own team for multiple games in this series.
Yeah, Dallas has funneled mid-range shots to these superstar players, and we don't know what exactly they're going to do to start on Boston, but I do think that Tatum is going to be challenged as a playmaker the most he's been challenged in the playoffs thus far. My hot take is I think Kristaps Porzingis is going to be trash. I think he's going to be bad. I think he's going to be terrible in this series. I think he's going to be the biggest defensive liability, and I think offensively his legs might not be under him yet. And I think that in itself is going to cost Boston this series.
Wow. Joel, I quite literally have the exact opposite take. I think KP is actually going to be Boston's second best player in this series. Now, the injury is the obvious concern here because it may be that he's just not 100% right yet. I don't know. I can't speak to that. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt because I am big on healthy KP. Like, I think he was their second best player this regular season, and that was a controversial take at the time because Jaylen is such a signature guy with that franchise, and he's been there for so long, and he's always going to put up the bigger counting stats in terms of his scoring. But KP has such a unique value to this Boston team that I think is really irreplaceable. And I prefer this matchup for him for several reasons compared to Jaylen. First of all, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, what does Dallas want to do defensively? When you're looking at these isolations from star players, we've seen it throughout this postseason. They want to load up with help, and they want to force you to beat them with playmaking and with shooting. KP just kind of takes away that ability to load up the paint because you're playing 5 out and he is an elite 3-point shooting big. Also, Dallas really likes to switch. They're very comfortable switching. It was something that they did to great effect against OKC. He makes it a lot harder to do that in this matchup because he is perhaps the most effective mismatch attacker in basketball. He averaged 1.3 points per post-up, and he's just the exceptional guy where it's like PJ Washington is a legit mismatch for him. Luka Doncic is a legit post-up mismatch for him. Like, the guy's 7'3". He's an out-of-this-world shooter. He's been so much more physical this year. He draws fouls at a crazy rate. So it's really, really difficult to switch against the Celtics. And he can feast as a popper out of pick and roll. So if you're ever trying to sit and drop and try to take away those drives from Tatum and Brown, like, you have one of the best pick and pop bigs in the league. So I do think that he is set up to thrive offensively in a way that, like, Jaylen, if he is seeing aggressive help, like, he may struggle as a playmaker because that's not his strength. And I do think that they will try to force both him and Tatum to beat them in that way. But KP's skill set offensively is so valuable, especially in this matchup. And defensively, I just think I'm more confident in Boston's counters to having him targeted than you are, Joel. I think legitimately Jayson Tatum is just such an exceptionally versatile defensive player. His ability to take on those fives, it just takes a lot of pressure off of KP to guard those actions. And it's like PJ Washington then is going to have to start really hitting his pick and pop threes. He's going to have to really hit his corner threes if KP is roaming off, which we know he can do. We know he can also go ice cold. And if you're not holding KP accountable, then he's just an awesome pure rim protector. And then he can be super impactful in that role. So I think it's that rim protection, it's that offensive versatility, the spacing, the efficiency that made him their second best player this year, and that I think can make him their second best player in this series.
No, that's completely valid. That's completely valid. I think Kristaps Porzingis has been exceptional for them all season. I just think the injury is going to affect him more than we think.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I just think it's really tough. Like, if he had played against Indiana, albeit limited minutes, I'm with you. But game 1 of the NBA Finals is the first time you're getting ramped up. I have my concerns about that.
Yeah, I mean,
Logan, where do you fall on this?
Getting up to game speed's tough. Like, I am worried about him getting up and down the floor for sure. And it has a ripple effect with this team. We talk about how talented they are at the top. And I know we briefly touched on this yesterday, Carson. If KP can't go, Celtics aren't winning a chip, like, just borderline. What, you going to try Luke Cornett out there against Luka? No. You're going to try Xavier Tillman out there against this team? No. Like, KP unlocked so much for this team. Like you said, in terms of mismatch attacking, floor spacing, rim protection, none of those guys can bring anywhere close to that value. And the fact that now you would have potentially 2 massive defensive liabilities on the court, like, you're not Al Horford's getting cooked. They need Kristaps Porzingis. So to me, he's the biggest X factor in this series, point blank, period. And y'all's 2 takes, that's going to be the difference in this series. Like, if we get great KP, I think Boston's probably going to win. If we get poor KP and he can't run, and it's not just that too, right? There's so many little things with basketball players. Like, you're not up to game speed. Your shot may just be off. Like, there's so many little things that can go wrong. I am more inclined to think that KP is going to play well. I don't think he's going to play great. Like you said, Joel, I think it's just hard to anticipate that a guy's just going to come back super fresh, ready to go after this long time off. But I don't think he's going to be a complete bum. I'm kind of straddling the fence here. I think he's good enough. I think he's good enough to keep him competitive, but I don't think that it's going to be good enough to put Boston over the top and win this series. It's the biggest X factor in this series to me is his health and how he plays, though.
It's a huge X factor, for sure. And the health is obviously a key dynamic that we just can't really predict with all that much confidence. Okay, before we move on and talk a couple of big picture topics outside the finals, Let's just all give our quick official predictions. Logan and I did do a full preview show yesterday. You guys can all go check it out. I'm taking Boston in 6. I just think their overall talent is overwhelming. I absolutely have more faith in Luka Doncic than Jayson Tatum. I have a lot of faith in Kyrie Irving as well, but I think this is just where we see Boston having 5 of the 7 best players in this series by a good margin. The depth of shot creation and shot making that they have, the number of high-level defensive players they have, the number of answers that they have on that side of the ball. They're just a very, very complete team, and I trust the collective of that starting 5 a great deal. So I have them in 6. Logan, what's your pick?
I have the Mavericks in 6. I think Luka is by far going to be the best player on the court. I think he's going to bring his special shot making over from the Minnesota series, and I think he does stuff that is just unstoppable to whoever they trot out against him. I think Tatum's probably the best defensive matchup for him, but anybody else, I think he is going to get to his spots out of pick and roll. He's going to get to his spots out of isolation. I just think he is effectively unstoppable as an offensive player right now. So I believe in him with that. And then I think Boston will go cold in a couple of games. I think their jump shot reliance will shoot them in the foot a couple of games. I think that Tatum is probably going to have a couple of stinkers where they need him to show up. And, that's where I come down. Those are my 2 big things. Is I think their offensive scheme is going to come back to bite them. I think Tatum's not going to play up to expectation. And I think Luka and Kyrie will be the 2 best offensive players in this series. So I'm going to take the Mavs in 6.
I got the Mavericks in 6. I think the rest they're getting before the finals is going to be huge for Luka's health. The way that I've seen Dallas manipulate defenses with offensive actions outside of the main action that's going on, which is usually Luka pick and rolls, is freeing up the offense. It's a big reason why Minnesota wasn't able to sit in their set defense and they got Rudy Gobert out of the paint. In game 1, the Mavericks had 62 points in the paint, and we're talking about a team that they're facing that's number 1 in rim protection and has been number 1 in defense rating all year long. I think the way Jason Kidd has been manipulating defenses on the offense side of the ball has been impressive. And I think defensively, we've seen the Mavericks change up how they play according to opponent. The Clippers, the OKC, Minnesota, they have been able to make these little tweaks that give them an edge. And I think Jason Kidd might be the biggest difference in this series just from a schematic standpoint and how he's able to adjust to things that are happening or hurting his team on the fly.
When it comes to the manipulation from Dallas's offense, that's where I think Boston's switchability is the single biggest thing. Because once you have to blitz a Luka Doncic pick and roll, when he's running it with one of those vertical spacing bigs, it's like you've kind of already lost, right? Because he is so exceptional. He's going to manipulate you into whatever he wants. He'll fake the skip pass and he'll create a wide open look for the roller. If not, he'll make that skip pass so consistently. To me, having the ability to have Tatum switching consistently on those actions, like you're just neutralizing the advantages. You're not creating an advantages. You're not creating the same sort of easy automatic offense for the bigs as much. That's where I think even though Minnesota is a better defense than Boston, I think Boston is a better matchup defensively. But it's going to be a fun one, man. Very excited. And we kind of have conflicting historical precedents here. We have the best player against the best team, and we'll just see which one is more exceptional in that respect. Is Luka one of those like absolute transcendent juggernauts who can just overcome whatever's in front of him? Which, I mean, that's a really, really high standard, to be fair, because if they don't win this series, I'm not even saying that like Luka isn't one of those all-time guys. Like, Boston is an interesting team that they don't have that stamped top 5 guy most champions do, but they have a level of basketball talent in the aggregate that we just very rarely see. So it's going to be a fun one. Okay, I want to zoom out for a second here because Dallas, of course, is in the finals. They've been phenomenal. Joel, I think you said they're 26-5 since the trades. I believe they're 34-14 regular season and postseason, but that's an incredible mark. And before the season, nobody would have expected them to be here. And even post-trades, I had them as my number 2 contender going into the playoffs in the West. Then I moved them down to 3 during the playoffs, and I felt that Denver was like the clear favorite for most of this year. So it's not shocking that Dallas is here, but it is a bit surprising. So with that in mind, Joel, who do you think is best set up to be the favorite in the West next year? Is it going to be Dallas? Is it Denver coming back strong after a disappointing second round exit? Who do you view as that top dog?
I think Denver might regress if they lose KCP. Man, that'd be such a huge blow. The easy answer is OKC. because of how much they have at their disposal this offseason, both in cap space and picks. They can do whatever they want. You know, they can add a role player, they can add a star. There's so many different options with them. Outside of OKC, I'm going to go with the sleeper pick. And the sleeper pick I'd go with would be the Memphis Grizzlies.
Ooh.
I think the Grizzlies have a real shot. This past season, I picked them to miss the playoffs. So this is a full circle moment where you're getting Ja back, Desmond Bane, you have Jaren Jackson. Gigi Jackson has made some strides in his rookie season. I think they can make a move or two by either drafting a rookie or with the mid-level exception to make their team better. I think next year is the first real year that we're going to get of the Grizzlies incorporating Marcus Smart and what his toughness means to the team as a whole. They need to get better in their half-court offense, but this has been a team that has shown us that they could be a top 3 seed in the West, and they're very young. And Joel Moran, the world has kind of forgotten about him, but he is one of the most electrifying young players too, and the way he plays the game, if he stays healthy, he gives Memphis a very high ceiling.
Dude, no shit, Joel came in here hot, man. That is a blazing take. Wow, I was not expecting Memphis to come out of your mouth. I like the take, like, especially what we got out of Gigi Jackson this year. I know a lot of people had him graded as like a second-round guy. I had him lottery. I loved him and how just butter smooth his game was. He wasn't really in a winning situation at South Carolina. Like, it was just kind of him putting up shots, but he's a real difference maker in terms of what he brings in, you know, other creation. Carson and I have talked for years now about how Memphis needs that third guy to put them over the top, and at least another offensive-oriented superstar that can really serve buckets, you know, by himself or off ball. And so I think he's a huge X factor. I'll go ahead and I'll take the easy answer. I'll take Oklahoma City. I think that they're a no-brainer for me just in terms of SGA is going to get better. J-Dub's going to get better. Chet's going to get better. I also think Chet is just going to shoot better next playoff run. Like, I don't know if the lights were too bright. Like, that's just a huge game changer. And then the fact that, as you mentioned, they're going to bring back all the important role players, and they have a surplus of young assets and picks that they can throw out if a superstar becomes available, or, you know, a sub-superstar level, like all-star kind of caliber player. Carson and I talked about Lauri Markkanen during the season. Like, if any of those guys become available, Oklahoma City is really well-equipped to make a run at any of those guys. So it may be low-hanging fruit, but I'll go ahead and I'll say that I think Oklahoma City will probably be the 1 seed next year and just may well be the favorite with how their young guys progress.
They have so many opportunities to improve. Like, what an incredible spot they're in as a franchise, because they can make big moves. They could go out there and try to package their assets together and get a legitimate star. Lauri Markkanen to me has just always been like my favorite fit. Just add a big four who also is incredibly skilled offensively, is dominant without the ball, elite floor spacer, really can help solidify things on the glass for you. But it could be a number of things. It could just be like a versatile big forward like Deni Avdija, who I have always loved, and I've seen those rumors start to pick up. I think that he would be awesome there. He'd be a legit needle mover, like such a good playmaker, such a versatile defender, really improved as a shooter, really good ball handler. A lot of people don't watch the Washington Wizards, but folks, they clearly have dudes who move the needle, right? KP had a career season last year. Nobody really talked about it. Daniel Gafford has consistently been one of the best pure rim protectors in the league. Nobody's really talked about it all that much, but Deni is another one of those diamonds in the rough. Could be Isaiah Hartenstein, could be a conventional center who can solidify things with rim protection and rebounding alongside Chet, but Hartenstein's good because he does bring that offensive skill, the playmaking, the touch. There's a lot of paths that they can take where you look at them already and they're oozing with talent. They're just not quite physically mature enough is the biggest thing that stands out. And also, I wish that J-Dub had been better as a second option for them. But yeah, they have a lot of ways to become a pretty clear front runner in this conversation. Memphis is really interesting. I'm not there with you. I've seen a lot of Memphis hype, and of course they're going to be dramatically improved from this year, just getting everybody back. But I do still have some big questions. I still have some real questions about what the ceiling for that half-court offense looks like, because that has been the biggest limiting factor for them. I still have my concerns about Ja as like the number one offensively on a title team, just in terms of the efficiency, how erratic he can be as a pull-up shooter. And I also have concerns about what the post Steven Adams Grizzlies look like, because I think JJJ is very reliant on being allowed to roam and not have to be like your primary conventional rim protecting five, and also from having a great rebounding five alongside him, because he's not a good rebounding four even. He's just not a good rebounding big whatsoever. So they're always going to have that dynamic of, okay, do we prioritize anchoring this really stout defense and bringing in a legit defensive five, a grown man alongside Triple J, or are we prioritizing having more of a legit 5-out offense where Triple J is at the 5 and we have more skill on the floor? Unfortunately, I don't think either one of those configurations are quite good enough to be the favorite out west to me. But you guys mentioned GG Jackson. I think he still has a ways to go before he's like a legit, star level guy if he gets there. Like, he was impressive this year for sure, but there's a difference between what he did on a team that is tanking and contributing efficiently in a high volume role on a team that's trying to contend. I love Vince Williams though. Vince Williams is an awesome two-way player, and I think that they definitely found some good stuff this year, but they are farther away to me. I would still probably say Denver, and that is contingent upon them re-signing KCP, but I think that they're in decently good position to do that. He may get pulled away, but I think there's a real chance that they bring him back, and if they do, then they have the best starting five in the conference locked in. I also think their depth should improve naturally to some extent. Christian Brown developing, Peyton Watson developing, Julian Strother developing, who I think could be a legit rotation guy by next year. And then I would love for them to add one more ball handler and a decent bench big, because like those have kind of been the frustrations. Reggie Jackson wasn't good enough as that bench ball handler, and obviously DeAndre Jordan can't play playoff minutes, but their formula is just the most reliable to me. And Minnesota disrupted it, and they are a really tough matchup for Denver, but they're also specifically engineered defensively to give Denver fits. And I'm more concerned about Minnesota's offense than I am anything with Denver. And I think Denver, for anybody outside of Minnesota, is the nightmare matchup with their overwhelming size and offensive skill and just the Jokic problem. So when they play up to their potential, they're still the best to me, but there's not a big gap. Like, Minnesota will be there. And you mentioned how opinion would have been higher of Ant if they had lost in the second round, Joel. I think the same thing is absolutely true for that Minnesota team. If they lost in a hard-fought 7 to Denver, we wouldn't have seen as many of their flaws exposed as we did in the Dallas matchup. But I still think that defensive foundation is great. Their depth is insane. Like, they're going to be really, really good. And Dallas is going to be really, really good next year. But I do view Denver as a kind of more stacked basketball team. Like, I just think their supporting cast didn't play like it. But overall, I trust their 3 through 5 more than I do Dallas, even though I think highly of those guys. It's just like the impact an MPJ can have, the impact Aaron Gordon can have, KCP can have. Like, we know what those dudes can do. They are really, really high-level role players. So I lean Denver in that one. Okay, let's take a moment just to reflect on what we've seen this postseason, because there's been a lot of awesome basketball, and now here we are sitting on the finals, and there's only 2 teams left, but we've seen 16 teams play playoff basketball. So, Joel, what has been your single biggest takeaway from this postseason?
It's adaptability. I think Minnesota ran into it. You mentioned Minnesota and their weaknesses. Tim Connolly built a roster that was constructed to beat Denver with just Denver in mind. And then it comes Dallas, a team that plays different, and they're just not able to handle it. Jaden McDaniels is not strong enough to be with Luka. You start to see that, maybe their perimeter defenders aren't as well equipped to guard this type of team as we thought. Their slow-footedness in the perimeter really caught up to them. So I think it's just adaptability, and the teams that are able to adjust and have the pieces to on the fly match up with what other teams have. I think those are the ones that end up winning championships. We've seen it with Dallas this year. I think OKC needs to learn a lesson or two in this as well with adaptability, because I think they thought their easy fix was lessening the Josh Giddey minutes. But when they did that, they couldn't shoot still. They couldn't shoot on a high volume of 3-point shots. They had a 5-out offense going for them. And I think they thought the high volume of threes was going to negate the rebounding woes they had, but they didn't account for a slump in 3-point shooting. And then the rebounding really cost them. So their number one priority is to go get a rebounding big, whether it's a forward or a big man, somebody that can help out on the boards. And I just think that's the main key, adaptability, not building your roster to compete with one said team, but building your roster to compete in a plethora of series so you can give yourself the best chance to win a championship.
Yeah, and with versatile lineup configuration, because I think the biggest difference between Minnesota and Denver, that Minnesota going and playing Dallas was the fact that not only do you have Rudy Gobert camped down there in the paint, it clogs up the lane for your superstar, right? There's two guys down there, your own man and the defensive guy. And so you just need other combinations of, different stuff. Like I thought Minnesota, and I know that their defense and their offense was statistically better with Gobert on the floor, but it's like at a point, I'm trotting Naz Reid and Cat out there, and I'm trying to spread Dallas out. Like I'm trying to open up the paint for Ant, or I'm trying to do something different. And so I think it's crucial. Yeah, I mean you can't just and look at all the like Dallas kind of has that too, right? Like they can go with Kleba at the 4 or at the 5 if they want, right? Mm-hmm. They've got these athletic bigs and they've got these wings that can also play at different positions. I think it's imperative. And with that, I think it kind of coincides with mine, and that's that the league has parity, man. Like there's never been I don't think the game's ever been more unpredictable because of the surplus of talent in the league. I think it speaks to the fact that what is this, the 6th consecutive year we're going to have a different NBA champion? Like that's ridiculous. And I just think the league is more talented than ever, and I think the game is more unpredictable than ever because of all the moving parts and all the talent that the league has. I think that's a great takeaway, though, Joel. Like, teams cannot just have one way to win basketball games now. You've got to have a counter to the initial adjustment. You got to have the counter to the counter. It's not just there's no one recipe that's going to work for every team.
I agree with what both of you said, and we're all kind of on the same wavelength. Specifically when it comes to Minnesota's adaptability and versatility, I don't want to shortchange them because I actually think that we saw a lot of different looks from them that were very effective, and I do think that their depth is a huge testament to that. Like we saw in the first series, how vital Nickeil Alexander-Walker was and how comfortable they were going with those 3 guard lineups with him and Conley and Ant and J-Mac sometimes all out there together because they were facing a perimeter-oriented team, and they were able to swallow those guys alive with their perimeter athleticism and ball pressure. We saw in the next round, right, it was so much about playing those 2 big looks, no matter what, having that sort of overwhelming size to deal with the Nuggets. A big Naz Reid series because of that. And then this past series, like, we again saw the depth of options, right? Kyle Anderson comes in and gives you 20 big minutes a night. To me, Minnesota's shortcomings were ultimately about a lack of really high-end offensive skill that you could bank on, but more than anything, Ant and Cat just not playing very well. I do feel like if those guys improve next season, Minnesota will be there. They're a little bit funky. They look a little bit different than a lot of the great teams because the offense isn't always super pretty, but they do have great depth and they do have great defensive personnel. But Dallas absolutely epitomizes the adaptability. Like, they just have a bunch of versatile, athletic dudes who defend alongside Kyrie and Luka, and that's been a key formula. And deep in the rotation, Logan, as you mentioned, like, sometimes it's a Kleba series, sometimes it's a Josh Green series, sometimes it's a Jaden Harden series. Like, it is very much dependent on the matchup, and that's kind of my biggest takeaway. Just matchups has been everything in this postseason. In the East, hasn't matters as much. The Celtics are just going to take care of whoever's in front of them. But, like, if you look at every matchup, particularly from the second round on in the Western Conference, Dallas OKC, some of the keys in that series, Dallas being able to switch everything, not being punished for doing so because Chet wasn't nearly mature enough as a mismatch attacker, their ability to roam off of a weak shooter, often Josh Giddey, but they were going to roam off no matter what, and OKC didn't punish them for that, so they could constantly have their elite rim protector in the paint, and they could control the glass. That wasn't necessarily in a vacuum about, oh, Dallas is so much better than OKC. It was they matched up significantly better. Minnesota-Denver. Minnesota's ball pressure was able to eat Jamal alive. And Jaden McDaniels, really the combination of perimeter defenders that they have, Ant did really well on him too. Nickeil Alexander-Walker did really well. But those guys ate Jamal alive. He wasn't athletic enough to beat them off the bounce. He wasn't physical enough in that matchup. Their roster of massive post defenders, as we talked about, could slow down Jokic a bit more than anybody else, and they just dominated athletically and exposed to some extent Denver's lack of real perimeter athletes and ball handling in a way that nobody else really could. Then you get to the Western Conference Finals, Dallas, Minnesota. And it comes down to Dallas having a massive shot creation and shot making advantage from their stars. Cat, who was vital defensively in that Denver matchup because of what he could do guarding Jokic, wasn't nearly as useful and struggled a bit guarding in space. Rudy, dealing with these elite scoring guards, was in much more of a predicament dealing with those guys. And Minnesota just had so many intelligent coverages that they were able to throw at Denver, applying the back pressure on Jamal Murray and trusting their guys to funnel him into Gobert, at times ignoring him in terms of the screen defender, right? Just having Cat stay attached to Jokic on the roll. Like, all these things that they could do against Jamal Murray, they just couldn't dream of doing against Kyrie and Luka, and the vertical spacing made that pick and roll so effective. J-Mac also, Jaden McDaniels, could not handle Luka nearly as well because of the strength gap. Just because, I mean, he's one of, if not the best perimeter defenders on the planet, but he's conceding so much weight and strength to Luka. So it was a totally different dynamic for him. Like, it feels like that has been the story of these playoffs more than we've seen in quite some time. Matchups are always important, but again, that comes into both your guys' points, adaptability and also the parity. Because when you have an overwhelmingly great team, 2017 Warriors, it doesn't matter how they match up. Like, they're just going to dominate anybody. We are in an era now where there isn't that clear-cut, overwhelming top dog. At least nobody has decisively proven that. And so matchups are key. Like, if you ask me, again, we talk about next year, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that in a vacuum, Denver was the best team in the West this year, as I actually thought from start to beginning. That's start to end. That's not to take anything away from Dallas. Dallas unequivocally deserves to be here. They took care of a team that beat Denver. But if that had been the matchup, I think it would have been a lot more challenging for Dallas than Minnesota. But Minnesota is an exceptionally challenging matchup for Denver. So it really is a fascinating story of this postseason.
The Rudy Gobert dynamic is interesting because we know how impactful he is. He had the best, I think, plus minus of anybody on the Wolves in the playoffs. But then you get the game 2 performance against Denver where he was not there. And they put on one of the best defensive performances in history. I thought that the move in the Dallas series was maybe to have him come off the bench and maybe spread out the floor. I thought they needed to kind of tinker with that a little bit, even if it was benching Cat, just something. I feel like an adjustment should have been made there, but who knows?
Yeah, the hard part is just they've struggled so much defensively in that matchup with Rudy off the floor. And game 2 was outstanding, but part of that was also they doubled the shit out of Jokic out of necessity, and nobody around him could make a shot, which it's like, I mean, it was an awesome formula for that game. Long term, though, also they were allowed to play so physically in that one. So Rudy is always a double-edged sword. You're always giving something up offensively. But I do think if he hadn't been on the floor defensively, like, I get it. He's still the dude who draws the attention because it's like, oh, shit, Luka hits that shot over him, right? Oh, my God, they're getting these great looks against Gobert out of pick and roll. But he's a pretty exceptional defender, and I think was, in a lot of ways, still the strong point of that defense in that series because McDaniels struggled. Ant really struggled. He was making mental mistakes. I guess Kyle Anderson, you could argue, is the strong point of that defense. He was awesome, but, yeah, he's tough, and that's going to be a real long-term question for Minnesota. Like, can you live with his offensive limitations? Can you win a title, especially with Cat alongside him having 2 bigs in that look? We'll see. I think the jury's still out.
But it's cool, man. I don't know, like you said, dude. We can't have this domino effect anymore. Where one team topples the other, and then it's immediately, oh, this guy is better than this guy, or this team is so much better than this guy. Like, there's so many moving parts, and yeah, more so than ever. Like, it really is schematic differences and adjustments in matchups. The league's in a beautiful place, man. I love it. Like, I think it's fascinating. I think it makes the game so much more interesting. Like, that down point that you were mentioning earlier in the episode, Joel, from 2015 to 2018 sucked so bad because none of the regular season mattered. We all knew we were going to get...
Let's not put 2015 and 16 in there. Before KD.
True.
With KD, that's when things got bad.
Yeah. KD ruined the league for a couple of years.
That's why Kawhi Leonard was viewed as a hero. because
Yeah.
he beat the Warriors, but the Warriors were hurt though. But he still beat them.
Right, but all the props to him. It's an incredible individual run, and I love that
Yeah.
2019 Raptors team. But obviously, if KD's on the floor, the Warriors would have won. I mean, it went 6 with him playing 9 minutes, and it could have gone 7 if Klay didn't get hurt in the second half of that game. Like, that was just so clearly the most stacked team in league history. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, and the
I mean,
Raptors
more
would've
2017.
The Raptors would have went down in history as a team that we don't really talk about, and now they're
Not at
going
all.
down as a team that you look at the team top to bottom. I mean, the eighth man was like Fred VanVleet. I mean, that team was so talented. It was great.
Yeah, they're an awesome recent champ. It is fun, dude. The trend throughout NBA history is that we get these dynasties. You have these juggernauts. You have the 60s Celtics. You have the 80s Celtics and Lakers, and you have the 90s Bulls, and you have the early 2000s Lakers and the 2000s Spurs, and you have the Warriors. Like, you have the Heat in the early 2010s. That's just kind of how the sport has always been, with the exception of the 70s, which is the decade of parity. But I really like the space that we're in right now, because we're not dealing with like a lot of mediocrity. We're dealing with a lot of really, really good teams, and the league is just overflowing with talent, and the product is outstanding top to bottom. You can't find a team in the league that doesn't have like one young guy who you're excited about, one young guy who has real potential at the very least. It's awesome.
Washington.
And,
Sorry.
Denny.
We can
Bro.
all enjoy this parody until 2026. That's when the OKC dynasty starts.
And you very well may be right about that. I do think OKC is going to win a couple titles, and I do think we're going to see some of the same characters reemerging. Like, I think Denver is going to be back. Boston's going to be back. They have everybody under contract through next year. They're going to be every bit as good as they were this year. So that's where I think it's kind of better than the 70s. Like, I do think there are more legitimately great or potentially great teams in this era. You know, not to take away from the 70s, but you got a lot of 40-something win teams making the finals, and wasn't the best era for basketball. All right, Joel, before we get more into 70s basketball, I think we can get out of here. Appreciate you coming on. Everybody go check him out. Go check out Pick a Side. Awesome content. We're going to work with you guys more in the future. Love all the stuff that you do. Check them out across platforms, YouTube, TikTok. Check out the Joel Moran show, which Joel here does. Is there anything else that you want to plug?
No, that's it. I just want to thank you guys for having me on the show. I love your guys' show. And if I'm not mistaken, you guys are going to be in NYC for the BDGE debate or event. That would be awesome. I think we should definitely be pulling up, see you guys in action. But yeah, I love what you guys do, and I'm really glad that I was able to be on the show today.
Yeah, dude, appreciate you coming on, and that would be great because we don't get out to the East Coast all that much. So it's going to be a tight turnaround for us, but if you guys are there, that'd be super fun to see you all in person. So everybody go check out Joel. Everybody go check out Pick a Side. And if you want more of our content, then you probably know where to find it, but all across our YouTube channel, we've got all of our full shows. We've got our video essays. Logan just did a video on Ron Holland. We're getting into a little bit of draft season, so check that out. I did a video about Jaylen Brown playing the best basketball of his career in these playoffs just a couple days before that. So we'll have more of that coming leading up to and throughout the finals. We'll have another show before the finals as well, but you can check out our preview from yesterday. You can follow us across social, TikTok, Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh, and you can check out our merch at thevolume.com. You can also join our Discord. The link to that is at the link tree across our social media bios. Also, I forgot, before we get out of here, if you guys are looking at my face thinking what the hell's wrong with what happened to Carson's beautiful face, what happened to his gorgeous mug, my father struck me while playing basketball. That didn't sound right. That didn't sound right immediately. It was a drive. There was nothing nefarious going on. Maybe a frustration foul, but anyways, sorry about having to look at that injury. So one last shout out to Joel. Appreciate you coming on. As always, I've been Carson Brever.
I have been Logan Campton.
And this was NerdSesh.